In this lecture, we're going to go ahead and create this sign right here. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new document. My document is 1920 by 1080 pixels. The reason why it's so large is just like with the potion, we may want it to fill up the entire screen, but if we don't, that's okay. We can always shrink it down. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new layer. Then I'm going to grab my brush tool and switch it over to my paintbrush. And then I'm going to select a blue color to paint with. Generally, I just like to paint with the color blue because that's kind of the color that animators use to draw their rough sketches. If you look at old Disney sketches, that's what they used a lot. So I just like to draw with that. Now let's go ahead and draw this. So it's going to be a solid plank of wood. And then we can just hold down Shift and click on the other side of our screen to get to the other side. That was not very straight. I'm going to try that again. Perfect. Something like that should work. Next, let's go ahead and grab our lasso tool, and we want to make sure we're on the polygonal lasso tool. And then we're going to go ahead and select this shape out like so. And we're going to go all the way around and connect it. Then we're going to add a new layer, and then we're going to fill that in with a brown. So I'm going to come into my browns. Somewhere in there should do. And let's fill that in. Now we can go ahead and turn that background sketch off. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to make a copy of this layer. So we'll hit Control J, and then we're going to drag that layer underneath. Then what we want to do is we want to nudge that layer down just a little bit. So we can't really see it very well right now because both our layers are the same color. But now we're going to hit Control U or Command U if you're on a Mac, and that will bring up your Hue and Saturations panel. And we just want to darken that just a little bit. So to about there. And you can bring up the saturation too. As things get darker, they tend to become a little bit more saturated sometimes. We'll hit OK. And then we're going to nudge that down just a little bit further. So about there. Next, we're going to go ahead and go in there. Then we're going to select this darker color here. And then we're going to paint in these edges like so. So that way it becomes one solid piece. Great. Let's see how that looks from far away. Perfect. Next, let's go ahead and add in some of that wood texture. So I'm going to come up to my top layer, which is this layer right here, and I'm going to add a new layer above it. We want to make this layer into a clipping mask, so I'm going to right click it and come to Create Clipping Mask. And now we can paint that texture within this wood, and it's not going to go outside of the shape. Now let's select our color, and we're going to make a little bit lighter version of that, so about there, not too much lighter, and a little bit more towards the yellow. Then using my brush tool, I'm going to go ahead and paint in some texture. Now I'm going to zoom out really far because the smaller you paint, the easier it's going to be to get really nice strokes in there. So basically what we're going to do is we're just going to paint some lines like so, maybe some loops also, something like that. And that's just going to start giving it a very interesting look to its grain. Great, so that's our top layer of grain. Let's add a new layer underneath this, and that will automatically be turned into a clipping layer mask when we add it underneath another clipping layer mask. And now we're going to grab a little bit darker color. So we're going to select our main color, and then we're going to bring that down just a little bit, and we can bring it a little bit more towards the red. And using our brush tool, I'm going to bring my brush size up a little bit more this time. Then we can go ahead and start painting in some other wood grain. So maybe something like so. And for the most part, we generally want to stick with the same shapes. Great. Now, these might be a little bit too dark, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn down the opacity on it to about 75%. Same with my highlight one. Next, I'm going to add another layer of wood grain just to make this look even more interesting. So I'm going to add it underneath my clipping layer mask, and then I can drag that up to the top. That way it automatically creates it into a clipping layer mask, and I don't actually have to right click it and turn it into a clipping layer mask. So I'm going to select our highlight color right here. Then I'm going to come a little bit more towards the yellow side, but I'm not really going to change the brightness on it. Then I'll bring my brush size down. And then I'm going to add a little bit more texture in here. We can get pretty wild with this. And remember, this is texture, and it's also going to be covered by text and design, so don't worry if it doesn't look perfect. Just go wild with it and try different things. Now, this is looking a little bit too yellow for me, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my hue and saturation panel, and I'm going to change the hue on it. So if I drag it more towards the left, it's going to become more brown into the purples. So I want it to be a little less yellow and a little more brown, so about there should be good. Great. So now we got this really cool texture. Now this area right here is looking a little empty, so I'm going to go ahead and select this color right here and paint a little bit more texture in there. Just like so. Perfect. Next, let's add some of this wood grain texture onto the edge of our board. So I'm going to select one color at a time, starting with my bottom color. I'll select that dark color, and then coming down to my back layer, I'm going to add a new layer above that, right click it, and turn it into a clipping layer mask. So now everything I paint on this layer is going to be within the bounds of my undershape. Next, I'm going to go ahead and grab my color, and I'm going to darken it quite a bit. Somewhere about there should be good, maybe just a little bit darker. And the reason why I'm darkening it is because the wood grain on the edge of our board where the shadow is going to be a little bit darker. So let's go ahead and paint that in. So I have some there, there's a little bit right there. And we might have some going all the way along here, so we can go ahead and paint that in by hand, and maybe a little piece there. Come straight down right there, and we have some right there also. Next, let's go ahead and select our next color. So our next highlight color is going to be this one right here, and we'll darken that just a little bit. So we'll come down to about there, and then we can start painting that in. So there's a piece right there, there's a big piece right here, there's a piece there, and there's one not there. I think there's a little bit up here. Then let's select our last highlight color, which is this more yellow one, and we'll darken it a little bit. So we'll come down to about there. And then we'll go ahead and follow where that one is. So we'll add one there. There's a little bit over here. There's some there. And we might add a little bit here just to make it a little interesting. There's one there. And that's about it. Perfect. Now, this background part of the board isn't looking dark enough for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge these two layers together. So now that's all one layer back there. And then I'm going to bring up my hue and saturation panel and drag down the darkness just a little bit more. So maybe about there. Hit OK. Next, what I want to do is I want to merge all of these layers together so they're one. So now that's all one layer. And now I'm going to start hand painting in some detail. So if we zoom in here, we want this edge to have a little bit of a highlight. As it curves around, there might be a light source coming from over here, and it's hitting that tiny little curved surface, and it's going to be brighter than both these sides put together. So I'm going to go ahead and first blend these together. So I'll select this color right here, then bring them down my brush size. I'm going to go ahead and paint at 50% opacity, like so. And then I can select that mid color and paint that in at 100% opacity. Great. And we're going to do this all over. So I can go ahead and select this color, paint it at 50% opacity, and then select that mid color and paint that in. So we can do this all the way around the edges just to make it look a little bit more interesting. Next, let's go ahead and add that highlight on all these corners. So I'm gonna go ahead and select a really light color, so somewhere around there. Then using my brush and putting it at 3% opacity, I'm gonna go ahead and paint that in, like so. We wanna give it a little bit of texture since it's wood, so it might not just be one solid highlight line. And let's add one down here also. And I'll also add it to this side. And lastly, we'll add it to this top area. Let's zoom out and see how that looks. Great. Now, lastly, let's go ahead and add a couple of little divots cutting into the sides of our board. So the way we're going to do that is by grabbing our lasso tool, and then we're just going to go ahead and cut out a section like so. And we're just going to do that anywhere we want to have sort of a crack or a divot in our board. And then maybe we'll add one more right here. Perfect. Next, let's go ahead and zoom in there, and we're going to start hand painting this divot in. So the way we'll do that is by selecting this color right here, and then we're going to grab just a little bit darker version of it, and using our brush tool, we're going to hand paint a divot in. Make sure your brush is at 0% opacity. So we painted that side in. Next, let's go ahead and reselect our color. And then we're going to grab a little bit brighter version of that. And then we'll paint this side of the divot in, like so. And now if we zoom out, you see it looks like we took a little chunk out. Let's do the same up here. Now up here, it's going to be really simple. All we have to do is select our shadow color, and then we'll go ahead and fill that in like so. See how that looks? Great. And then up here, we actually don't have to do anything to that because we can't see that side of its surface. So we can just leave that the way it is. Awesome. So you just created the board and the base for your sign. In the next lecture, we're going to go ahead and create some design work to apply to our sign. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. All right, we're going to add a cool zigzag design to the top and the bottom of our wood piece. So we need to create a new document first. So we're going to go new, and our document is going to be pretty small. So let's start off with 400 by 100 pixels. And if we need to go smaller, we can. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and grab our lasso tool, and we're going to go ahead and click here, and click down here, and click up here, and click down, and we're just going to create a simple zigzag effect. Now once we get over here, we don't have enough room, so what we're going to do is we're just going to end it there and come all the way back and connect it. Next, we're going to go ahead and fill that in with white, but make sure you're on a new layer, and we'll fill that in. Now we can go ahead and turn this background off because we don't really need to see it. And then we're going to use our crop tool to crop our document over so it comes right to the edge of our third point. Great. Next, what we want to do is we want to shrink this down just a bit. So I'm going to use my transform tool, and I'm going to push it up like so. The reason for that is because behind it we're going to add some green painting. So I'm going to add in a new layer, and then using my paintbrush, and I'm going to switch over to a more texturized brush. Now I'm not using any brushes that are not included with Photoshop, so search through these till you find one you like. The one I'm using right here is labeled number 24. I'm going to go ahead and paint with that. Then I'm going to switch over to a green color, so I'm going to come into my greens a little bit more towards the aquatic side. And I want it to be somewhat desaturated, but not too desaturated. So somewhere in here should be good, maybe a little bit more saturated. And then we can go ahead and paint in those edges like so. And we want them to look hand painted. That's why we're painting them with this brush right here. Now, these are going to match up with each other on both sides when we paint in our pattern, so we want to make sure that they're relatively similar in width, so that should be a lot closer. Next, we're going to go ahead and select the shape of our zigzag. Then we're going to go ahead and push this selection back. So we're not pushing the image back, we're just pushing the selection back. So to about there should be good. Then we're going to go ahead and hit delete. Then we're going to go ahead and duplicate this layer. Make sure you unselect out of your selection, otherwise it's not going to select everything when it duplicates. So we'll go ahead and duplicate that. Then we're going to grab this new one and pull it back to about there. Great. Now everything that's green on this side we don't want. So we're going to come back down to our green layer, and using our erase tool, we're going to go ahead and erase by hand all of that area that's coming off the wrong side. Now, the last thing we want to do is we want to add a small dot into each one of these triangles. So I'm going to switch over to a yellow color. So I'm going to come into my yellows. Somewhere in there should be good. A little bit brighter. About there should be good. Then I'm going to go ahead and paint that in using my brush tool. And I can stay on this rough brush if I like, or I can switch over to a different brush. It doesn't really matter. Now, the last thing we want to do is we want to change the color of this inner spike right here. And the way we'll do that is by coming up to that layer, and then we're going to add a new layer above it, change it into a clipping mask, and then we can fill that whole layer in with an orange color. So we're going to come into our oranges and come pretty saturated to about there. Hit OK. Then we'll fill that in, and that changes that to orange. Now we can go ahead and merge all of these layers together. And then we're going to go ahead and select it with our marquee tool. Make sure you're on your rectangular one. And then we'll copy it and paste it into our document to see what size it is. A little bit too large, so what we're going to do is we're going to shrink it down by about half. So I'm going to come back in here, and then I'm going to come up to image, come down to image size, select that, and now I can shrink this down. Now if I hit this little chain link right there, this is going to help it shrink down and keep its proportions. So I'm going to cut this in half. So that's 150 plus 10 is 160. Great. We'll hit OK. So now that just shrunk that down for us. Next, what we want to do is we want to save this out as a pattern. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up to Edit, and then come down to Define Pattern. And we're going to call this Zig. Hit OK. And now that's saved out as a pattern that we can fill areas in with. I'll show you what I mean right now. So let's go ahead and delete this layer. And then we're going to add a new layer above this. And on this new layer, I'm going to go ahead and make a rectangular selection like so. And then I'm going to come to my fill tool. And up here where it says foreground, we're going to click on that and change it to pattern. And now you'll see right here we get another menu, and we can click on that. And we have all these different patterns we can choose from. Now right over here, that's the pattern we just created. So let's go ahead and select that. Then we can go ahead and fill in this area. And now you see it really quickly fills in that area with our exact pattern. And it duplicates it over and over again, so we don't have to do it. Next, let's go ahead and take our marquee tool. And what we want to do is we want to select right up to the bottom of one of these, like so, and hit delete. And then we're going to select right up to the top of it. So about there. And then we'll hit delete again. Perfect. So now we have our little pattern. Let's go ahead and place that on the top of our board. We can nudge it down if we have to. Now let's go ahead and duplicate this layer. We can drag this one down like so. Turn on our transform tool and flip it vertical. Awesome. Now let's hit enter. Now you'll notice that it's not lining up perfectly down here at the bottom. So what we can do is turn on our transform tool, and we can rotate that until it fits with the right angle. And we'll drag it into place. Awesome. Hit enter. Next, let's go ahead and merge these two layers together. And then using my erase tool, I'm going to go ahead and start erasing some of this area away. So like this area that's hanging over our divot, we don't want that there. So we'll erase that. And same with up here. So we're going to go ahead and erase this area that's hanging over the edge. Perfect. Now on these areas, we can go ahead and enlarge the size of our brush to quickly erase it away. Same with over here. And lastly, over here and right here. Great. Next, let's go ahead and bring down the opacity just the tiniest bit. So about there should be good. And the reason why we're doing that is so you can just barely see the wood texture and grain through our paint. Awesome. All right, that brings us to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, you learned how to create a really cool pattern in Photoshop and how to make it look like it's hand painted with a paintbrush. Then you also learned how you can create a small pattern and then have Photoshop duplicate it for you so you don't have to duplicate it over and over yourself. Thanks for watching this lecture, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. In this lecture, we're going to go ahead and add some text to our sign. So we want to find a really cool typeface to type our message in. So a really good place you can go to find typeface is a website called Dafont. That's D-A-F-O-N-T. I'll leave a link to this after this lecture. Now, if you're going to be building graphics for a game that are going to be used commercially, you need to be careful when finding typefaces on Dafont. They're not always commercial free use, so you need to make sure that their licensing says that you're allowed to use it in commercial projects. So let's go ahead and let's go into their website. So you'll see here they have a whole bunch of really interesting fonts you can choose from. None of these are the ones we want to choose from. You'll see here at the top they have all these different categories. And so where we're going to be going is to the cartoons. But you'll see here they have all these different types of typefaces. We can have a look at another category. So let's try looking at Destroyer. So you'll see you get these really cool fonts. But the one we want to do is in cartoon, and I've already pulled it up. It's called Chlorinar. I think that's how you say it. So you can go ahead and search that and this will come up. Once you find it, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to come over here to download, and then you're going to hit download. And then down here, once that loads, you're going to go ahead and open it. And you're going to open up this TrueType font file. So we'll double click that and open. And then you're just going to hit install. Now, I've already installed this on my computer, so I'm not going to reinstall it. But for you, you're going to go ahead and install that. Once it's installed, it's just going to automatically put it into Photoshop for you, and now we can use it. So how do you add text in Photoshop? Well, we use this text tool right here that looks like a T, and then we can go ahead and click and drag and create a text box like so. Then we can go ahead and type whatever we want in there. So I'm going to type a message that says, get as many coins as possible. Now, obviously, this is not the font we want, and it's also not the color. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select it, and then we're going to come up here to where this pink is. Now for you, it might be set to a different color, but that's just the color of your font. So we're going to go ahead and click that, and now we can drag this to wherever we want in the color spectrum and get it to be whatever color we like. Now, I'm just going to drag it down to my blacks, then hit OK. Next, I'm going to change the font type. So up here where I have my font type drop down, I have it set to Arial right now. I want to set that to my new font. And so if we remember what it's called, Chlorinar, and then we can go ahead and search that in our font search bar. So we're going to start typing it in, CHLO, I think. Yep, there it is. And so then I'm just going to push my down arrow key to get to it, and then hit enter. So now we have our font. Next, we want to enlarge it just a little bit. So I'm going to select it again, then come over to my character window over here. Now, if you don't have a character option over here, you want to turn it on by coming up to Window, and then coming down to where it says Character. Then you'll have your character window over here, and you'll be able to change your characters. So what we want to do is we just want to enlarge the size just a little bit. So maybe to about there. Perfect. Next, let's go ahead and use our grab and move tool and move this down. Now, I want to change something based off of my design preferences, but if you're working on a project for someone else, you may not be able to do this because they've already given you the copy for what it's supposed to say. But since I'm not limited to those rules, I'm going to go ahead and type in there try. Now the reason why I did that is because my as and my other as were lining up kind of funny, and it made the design look really bad. So that's why I added that try in there to space all this out a little bit more. Then I'm also going to play with the distance between the two lines of text. So right here, where these two A's are, one above the other, I can go ahead and drag that back and forth like so. And that'll allow me to give more distance there. So I'm going to bring it to about there. I can also play with the distance between each letter by coming over here where it says VA. And that will change that distance. So I'm going to keep it at about 10. Next, what we want to do is we want to select the shape of our font face. Now, we're not going to do this by actually clicking on the thumbnail, because what we could do is we could hit Control or Command and select the thumbnail, and that would select our shape. But the problem with that is that the inside of our font face is hollow, and we want to fill that in with white. And so right now we can't really fill it in, and if we invert the selection, it's going to fill everything out here as well as inside of our lettering. So what we want to do is we want to use a tool called the wand tool. So up here, right underneath our marquee tool and next to our lasso tool is a tool called the wand tool. Now if you're not on the magic wand tool, it's because you have selected the quick selection tool. So make sure you have the wand tool selected. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to click on the outside of our text. And now you see it selects everything on this outside area. Then we also want to select the inside of these holes. So I'm going to zoom in there. And the way I can do that is by holding down Shift on my keyboard and then clicking within the space. And by holding down Shift, that allows us to add selections to this already made selection. So I can do it here also, and I can add as many of those as I need. So there's also a hole right there. And I think we got them all. Great. Now let's go ahead and zoom out. Next, let's invert our selection by hitting Control-Shift-I or Command-Shift-I. And then we're going to add a new layer underneath our text layer. Then using the color white, I'm going to go ahead and fill that in, like so. So now we have that nice white fill inside of our text. Now I missed a few spots over here. So what I can do is I can just go ahead and zoom in there, and using my erase tool, I can go ahead and erase that area away. Great. Let's see how that looks. Awesome. Next, what I want to do is I want to add a drop-down shadow on this text. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over to our layer that has the white text on it, and we're going to come down to Effects and then come down to Drop Shadow. Then we're going to get this panel, and first off what we want to do is we want to change our opacity to about 75%, and then we're going to change the size to a pretty small size, so somewhere about there, and we want to turn the speed up so we get a really hard edge all the way up to 98%, and then we're going to bring down the size a little bit more because that's a little bit too big still. Somewhere about there should be good. So I have it set at 6 pixels for the side and 96% for the speed. Next, let's go ahead and select a different color. So I'm going to select this black, and let's change it to a dark brown. In fact, if we come out over here, you can see we can select from our document. So let's select our darkest color that we have out there, and then let's make that just a little bit darker. Perfect. Is it okay? And then right here where it says distanced, we're going to move that out so it comes a little bit underneath our text, like so. Now you can also change the angle at which your cast shadow is going to be cast. So if I turn this, you'll see it moves it over to that side, or if I move under, it's going to move up to the top. And so we want to keep that so it's at 90 degrees. Awesome. Once we have that all set up correctly, we can go ahead and hit OK. And now we have our sign. Now let's go ahead and see how this looks in a background from Rayman. So let's select all of our layers, make a copy. Let's merge those layers together. So now we have one flattened version of our sign, and then we can select the rest and put them into a folder so we still have those layers in case we ever want to change things. Then we can click our layer and drag it in to our background document. And then I can shrink it down just a little bit. I think we did a pretty good job at replicating the style of Rayman. Now, rereading this, I realize it doesn't make any sense because it says try get as many coins as possible, so I apologize for that, and I hope you can forgive me. I hope you guys enjoyed working on this project, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. Thanks for watching.